Okay, when we're thinking about families in family sociology, we look at what is sociology is what I want to start with. So we look at it in terms of a definition of what is sociology, and we're looking at a systematic study of human society and social interaction. So let's look at the key pieces here. We're going to start off with systematic study. Systematic just means there's a scientific policy or a way of organizing it and researching it in a very scientific, systematic process. And so what we're looking at in this course will be very fact-based, more so than opinion, and more so than just belief. It's going to be fact-based based on the research. So it's systematic, and it's based on the individual relationship and the society, both. So it's going to look at the relationship between the two. How is it that the individual is affected by the society, and how is society affected by individuals? But it's going to be done through systematic, and it's going to be consequences of the differences between the two, of the individual and society. So when we think about that, well, why is it important? Well, to understand the interpretation or understand the interdependence of the complexity of social life. One is separate from the other, and yet they relate to one another, and they need one another. Society needs the individuals, individuals need society. And then to participate in the process of public, social, and economic, these are policies. Now the government affects policies, we affect policies, so society and individuals, this relationship and how the things that occur in sociology, and specifically in this case, sociology of family, how those decisions affect policies in the long run, and to understand what the differences are and the possible explanations for these differences. That's what sociology of the family does. And that's what we're looking at and going to explore in this particular course.
I want to be able to introduce to you sociological imagination as a topic to explore and to be aware of while we look at family and family sociology. The topic was introduced, or the concept was introduced by Charles Wright Mills, and he defined it as the ability to see the relationship between individual experience and the larger society. And he divided it into two dimensions: personal trouble and public issues. Now, personal trouble he looked at as being the private troubles that you and I might have and our network of friends on a regular basis, things that we might be our own shortcomings or our own issues that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. And then public issues would be those matters that are beyond our own personal control. These might be things that originate at a society level. Government policy changes, a new government comes into play, we have new policy, and so it affects us as an individual. So when we're looking at it from family, there's some things that might be the family's responsibility itself, and there's other things that can be as a result of societal shifts and changes. Now, early times when they were looking at this issue of sociological imagination and sociology, they were also looking at some issues like suicide. So personal troubles in relationship to suicide might be the person feels as if they have personal responsibility for how they feel, that they've got low self-esteem, or they don't feel as if they're very successful. They might see themselves as a failure. Whereas there's some public issues that may also come into play, that some suicide might be a result of these societal reasons. There's a lack of cohesiveness. This person doesn't feel very connected in their community. Maybe there's poor education or economic issues that can contribute to how a person feels. And so that was an important feature. So when we look at sociology, and looking in particular at family, we can look at personal issues and we can look at public issues, and I'd like to have you keep that in mind as we carry on throughout this course. So when we look at what is family, one of the things we should be considering is that family has not remained consistent over time, or even in places across Canada, that family changes over time. And so we can experience this even in our own lifetime. We see it in the media. If you look at page 4, box 1.1, you'll see a variety of definitions of family, and we'll follow up on this in a little bit. So what's really important about what is family is that there's some things about family and some terms I want you to be familiar with. One is about what is a household. Sometimes there's a mix-up between family and household, and we'll explore family further in a moment. But a household are people who occupy the same dwelling, one or more families, single person, or group of related or even unrelated people, a grandmother, an apartment roommate, brothers and sisters. There is a time in our history this definition was family, but in more recent years that doesn't count as a family so much. It would be more of a household of unrelated people and some related people living together in one house. Now, in our culture and in many others, the majority of our marriages are related in terms of what's called monogamy. This is where one person is married to one person at a time. But there are other cultures that have what is called polygamy, and this is where one person might be married to several other people of the opposite sex. So these are two terms you should be familiar with. In our culture, we're going to be talking about family rather than households, and we're going to be locally, mostly focusing on monogamy. Now there is another style of, and I'm using quotation marks in the air, communal living, a group of families which have a shared belief, and they share resources like money, clothing, and food, and work is done to benefit the general whole of the community. And the community takes precedence over the family. Now that's a style of living, but it's not falling within our definition of what we'll call family, so we'll move on past that. So let's look at a definition that we will be using throughout this course, and we're going to define family. And if we're going to define family, we can look at it from more than just one perspective, because in Canada there isn't a uniform single one definition, but there are different ways of defining family depending upon circumstances, who we are with, and under what conditions we need to have a definition. So we have in Canada legal definitions, but we also have in our own communities social definitions. And we even have within our own network of friends personal definitions. And there are what we would call intentional families. And we're going to look at all of these. Because family changes over time, and it's not the same throughout time or even within Canada in terms of the definitions, we have had to have legal definitions because there are times when, as a result of medical issues or incarceration, you need to have connections, or you can have visits or connections with people in your family. And so there needs to be a legal definition of what that family is. And so there's no real fixed legal definition across the board. However, government regulations determine family for such services as medical and family benefits. So common law spouses, single parents with one children, same-sex couples are all considered family under various laws and legal definitions. Now you'll see that in your textbook, where they'll see in box 1.1, you'll see some of these definitions. Statistics Canada has the Census family. That's something you should be familiar with. The Correction Services Canada has a definition. Air Canada has a definition. Vanier Institute and the Fraser Institute, they're both research facilities that research the family, and they have their own definition. Of course, Children's Aid Society, there's a variety of these services that have definitions that enable them to provide the services that they provide. And so if I'm Children's Aid Society, I need a definition of family. One, because I need to know who I'm working with, but also know who's included to have access to files and information. Now, social definitions. Various groups, including religious organizations and ethnic groups, will have definitions of family which are different. And in hospitals in some places, you might apply, and they may apply some of these more social definitions in terms of who can visit a family member. In spite of the differences in terms of social, there are two basic concepts that emerge. One is called the nuclear family, and this is a family consisting of a husband and wife and their children. It's also often called the standard North American family. It forms the basis of what advocates call traditional family values. Family orientation is family of orientation, is the family that we were born into and raised in. And a family of procreation is the family that we form through marriage or cohabitation. And then the other form is what's called extended family, and this is basically a nuclear family, but it also includes relatives, grandparents, aunts and uncles that could live under the same house and the same roof. Now we also have personal definitions. And these definitions of family might include close friends that we consider to be family members. They aren't family members by blood or by marriage, but they are family members by definition, by relationship and how we feel about them. Then we also have what's called intentional families, families whose members, whose members, through not, although not related by blood or marriage, call themselves a family. They may share residences and a common lifestyle. Decision to join often arises out of human need for companionship and an emotional connection that comes from shared experiences. So they become very important. So you can see, in terms of Canada, the definition of family is quite broad. It's not as limited as maybe you may have thought.
So when we're thinking about families, sociologists have looked at try to ways to explain things globally, but also singularly. And these kinds of questions that we have here are important. How does the theory account for both change and continuity in a family pattern? Both society and family. They influence each other. How do they do that? How does the individual influence society? How does society influence the individual? The relationships within families. How do moms and dads relate to one another? How does that relationship hold true and important to children? How do children impact the role of parents in that relationship? Looking at the policies and the practices of government, social agencies. How does what goes on in the family impact social agencies and government, and vice versa? So part of what we're going to be doing in family sociology is looking and answering these sorts of questions as well. So how does family influence society, and how does society influence family? Well, as it will indicate here, that families don't exist in isolation. Families exist in relationship to other structures, other parts of society, and so because they don't work independently of one another, there is this sort of component about interdependence. And so when we're looking at it, we're looking at two different directions. We're looking at two different directions, micro and macro. Macro is the big picture view. It's looking at society as a whole and seeing how family fits among everything else in society. It's as if you're standing up on a very big hill, looking down on society, being able to see everything and how everything interacts with one another. And being able to specifically see family and how family interacts with the rest of society, and how society interacts with family, and how each makes the other change. Micro, on the other hand, is getting off the hill and down in among the individual families, and watching and seeing how they function, what they work like, how they interact with one another, moving from family to family and watching the dynamics between them. So when we look at theories, some theories are going to be very much macro and some will be very much micro.
Now we're going to look at all these different theories of family through sociology. And what I would like you to consider is every one of these theories that we're going to review have been researched many, many, many times, such that they can be called a theory. And so how you can consider looking at these variations of how they view family is, imagine you're able to be way up in the sky looking at Canada, and you can see individual families from your view. If you would look at all those families and put on different sunglasses with different tints, and so really what you're seeing is all of those families, but through different colored lenses, you're kind of looking at it from different theories' views. Because all these theories, they do their research looking at Canadian families and North American families and family systems all around the world. However, they view the family in different ways. It's the same families. They just do their research and have found different things that help them explain how it is that families exist. And we're going to look at each one of these theories. Now this isn't the be-all and end-all of all theories. It's the ones that are focused on family and the ones that your textbook has chosen to focus on. The first is the structural functionalist view. This is a relatively older view. It's almost a traditional view, if you will. It explains how families are related to one another um, in the family, but more importantly, in terms of how the family interacts with the rest of society. And so, part of what is important here, if you look at the title, it says structural functionalists. So, one of the ways to consider it is that family has structure, and this structure has to function in society. That if this family structure, and there are other structures in society, there's politics, there's education, there's healthcare, these are other structures in society. If each of them fulfills their function, then society is stable. And social stability is one of the main focal points of what structural functionalists want. And so the family has a function in society, that if families do what they're expected to do, then they fulfill their function and they can contribute to this stability of society. So some of the things that are important for families to do as a function, it's a reproduction function. So families are to produce children, and these children need a place for physical protection and economic support and emotional security, and that's what the family provides. Um, there's a house for them to live in. There's money coming in to pay for food and shelter and clothing and other trappings, and emotional security, someone who shows love and support for them. But in addition to this, part of what a parent's role in the family is to their children is to be teaching them how to be law-abiding and contributing members of society. In a larger sense, what this is called is socialization. This is a lifelong process in which cultural knowledge on how to survive and to participate in social life are passed on from one generation to the next. Now, not all cultures learn the same thing, so not all cultures socialize their children in the same information, but all cultures socialize their children. And so when family does this, and does so in a positive and successful manner, this contributes to social stability. Now, there are things that are called social scripts. These are the cultural rules that outline the what, the where, the when, and the how, and the why we should do something. We should do what we do. The way we greet one another is part of a social script. The way that parents parent, the way that children are children is a social script. We behave in certain ways in our communities, and we do so based on these social scripts. Structural functionalists believe that role specialization increases efficiency of family functioning, which just really means that everybody has a job, and that if everyone fulfills their responsibility in a family, then the family functions successfully. Now, you're going to hear this term throughout the course, in particular regards to family and family theorists, micro and macro. Now, the difference between the two was described earlier. This is a macro view. They look at the bigger picture. They don't look at the individual functionings between the family members. They look at the role of family in the bigger picture with other institutions, with other structures in society. Now, the strength of this particular theory is that it emphasizes the family relationship to other institutions and how it contributes to the whole. And that's an important feature in terms of society as a whole, that family plays an important role. Now, the weaknesses is that it really views family in a very traditional way. And families don't look like this. They don't have mums and dads and children in every family. It's not always built that way. There are single-parented families by moms, single-parented families by dads, blended families. There's a variety of variation of families. So this doesn't necessarily reflect all families. It's not as clear in explaining why families in society change, just that they do. It often ignores the topics such as family violence or sexual abuse and sees delinquency and crime as social rather than a family problem. And so there are some weaknesses. Another one of the weaknesses is it views all families as being these standard North American families, and that's not necessarily what they are anymore. Now, if we carry on looking at another theory, and I'm only going to highlight these, so we're going to move on to the next one. It's going to be family in conflict, or conflict theory. And Marxism is the sort of father or founding theory that falls under conflict, where it looks at the inequity that it might exist economically between the rich and the poor. Well, as that relates to family, some stress negative influence and are connected to the power relationships and inequity that may exist even within the family, the difference between men and women, or the economic benefit or disadvantage for people in society. So, like the structural functionalist, conflict theory is also macro. It views the family from a perspective of its relationship to society. Some other theories in conflict focus on how families compete with other social institutions for scarce resources. So, the perspective here is that not everyone has equal access to the resources that are available in society. This could be healthcare, education, job market, and so not every family has equal access. So families compete with one another in other social institutions to have these advantages, and some tend to have better success than others. So, for example, how family benefits in the workplace are negotiated. Not every workplace has family benefits, and some families are further disadvantaged. Conflict theories are not strong at demonstrating how families contribute to society as a whole, and neither are they very good at explaining why society's norms and values for families tend to change very slowly. This particular group doesn't spend a lot of time directly in studying family. They look at the society as a whole more often. We'll look at another theory that does look at family more, that has a conflict base. The next one we'll look at is what's called symbolic interactionalists. Now, this is one of the few that we'll talk about that is a micro view. It looks at things in a much more smaller view. According to this particular theory, individuals develop a sense of self, status, and role through the attitudes and relationships of others, and they develop a sense of role that they are suspected to fulfill. Putting yourself into another's place is called role taking, and role strain is a sense of discomfort when felt when you have too many things trying to be expected of you. So one of the things that social interactionalists or symbolic interactionalists focus on is interpreting the meanings of words and actions of family members. And so it's all about the face-to-face interaction that occurs and how it is that families understand that they do care about one another, and what the rules are, and how they interact, and how they communicate that to one another, and how they understand the relationship between mom and dad and kids, kids and kids. It's all through the face-to-face interaction that occurs. And so because the focus of this particular micro theory is to concentrate on the interaction between the individuals rather than the larger social system. So how do families function and learn what's important? How do they pass on traditions? How do they pass on celebrations and rituals? It's all about these symbols, the use of words, actions, and they're interested in how we attach meaning to these actions and these activities. The value of symbolic interaction is emphasis placed on people's responsibility in shaping their view of the world around them. As a result, it's been used as a basis for family therapy. Its major weakness is that it ignores factors such as laws, economics, social class, values, and does not explain society-wide changes in family. It is going to be, I believe, the primary one that looks at a micro view. Now we'll move on to family as a system. Now, systems theory is both macro and micro. It's not solely one or the other. For example, if a parent is stressed or angry, this will likely have an impact on all family members. So there's a micro view. If, for example, one person is in the role of the parent, another must be in the corresponding role of child. So it looks at the sort of micro components of family. It recognizes the complementary roles, looking at how the common subsystems of spouse, parent, and sibling. So the system contains a set of interrelating and interacting parts. This will be the family, parents, and children, and these parts need to work in a particular and functional manner. The strength of this particular theory is that it sees families is its ability to account for the impact of one individual's behavior on all. So if a father or a mother loses their job, how it affects them affects the rest of the family. And that's the sort of relationship between how the impact on one individual affects all members. It might be that one member of that family then, as a result of the loss of a job, starts to feel um, poor, sad, and despondent, and it will either be taken out on a child or on a parent, or will be affecting them in some capacity. One of the weaknesses is concentration of family systems as a whole overlooks the experiences of the individual, especially women in case of wife assault, assumes destructive behavior is a vicious cycle, little to do, little to no reference to the important social factors, although theory is quite capable of introducing such influences. Now, another system, another way of looking, if you will, at family is what's called fair trade within the family, or it's also known as exchange theory. And here, exchange theory explains that family can be viewed as a terms of cost benefit. It explains decision making in families, especially in the husband wife relationship. In spousal relationships, power is not usually shared equally. For instance, if they have studied marital interaction as a bargaining process used by one member who wishes to change family rules. Power in families is not shared equally by the spouses, and in many families, the husband has the advantage in education, income, prestige, social status, and even size. And as a result, he has more resources from which to bargain with. Now, the weakness of this particular theory is that it focuses on the individual rather than the overall family needs, and it assumes that people behave in families as if they only have self-interest, and most families work beyond one's own self-interest. Now, I mentioned that there was another conflict type theory that works on the family specifically, and that would be the feminist perspective. With the feminist perspective, it's macro, and they have a great impact um, in terms of a driving force and research into the family, where they view not the economic inequity that exists between some families and other families as in conflict. They look at gender as a necessary category to understand and explain the inequities in home, paid labor, politics, culture, law. They will say things like, in terms of what makes the biggest difference in this gender inequity, is that they would describe it as a method, or as a system that's called patriarchy. It views patriarchal view of the family is what they see as the problem. This is families that are focused on male-led families. Men hold the influence and the power and the authority in a family. It's called patriarchal. Unlike female-driven families, which would be considered matriarchal, and there aren't very many examples of that in our human existence. And then what they would be aiming for, or striving for, is what would be called egalitarianism, or a balanced. Now, how they view this inequity exists in home, paid labor, politics, law, and culture. In homes, men tend to have more power and control than women and receive more benefits. Women do what's called the housework for the most part, and it's also known as the second shift. In paid labor, men are paid more for equal work. Women had been discouraged from working in non-traditional roles in military and construction, science and technology. Now these things are changing, and we see huge improvements, but there's still a considerable imbalance in our society. In terms of politics, they're not properly represented in politics, given their number in city councils and government. In terms of law, feminists made initial headway when women won the right to be seen as a person in 1929, and have been making steady progress in the law, but there's still inequity that exists. And in culture, part of the Canadian culture has been really focused on men's success and what men have done. We see more examples where women are starting to be culturally seen as significant. For example, the women's hockey team and how it broke in. It made a lot of huge difference, and a lot of examples like that. Anita, I just lost her name, Bondar, the Canadian astronaut, um, started to make a shift in what it was to be a woman in Canada and the cultural effect. Now, I've got there referencing gender socialization. And this is the process by which individuals learn the socially defined behavior that's appropriate to be a male and to be a female. Now, it's important to make the distinction. It's the socially appropriate behavior for male and female, not not genetically male and female, but what it is to be a boy in this culture and what it is to be a girl in this culture, what it is to be masculine and what it is to be feminine. That's not universal. So gender socialization is, how does a culture teach their men and women to be men and women? Boys are expected to be more active and aggressive, girls expected to be more nurturing and sensitive to others. Still widespread acceptance of the idea that women can be fulfilled only as a wife and a mother. Now we're seeing this shift even in our own lifetime, but for many generations of women, the only way that they were going to be seeing fulfillment as a person was to be a wife and a mother. Now we're seeing that the age in which women are marrying is later, same with men for that matter, and the rate in which they're having children is later in life. It suggests more women are following a career path that didn't do in the past. So we're seeing this shift even in our own time. Now, the last two theories that we're going to look at, this one here is called the Ecological Theory. And you can see these circles, interlocking circles here, and each individual circle out, is the relationship between family and society. And it sees family as part of an interlocking system that influences each other at 5 levels. And I'm going to walk you through each of the levels. The micro level, the one that's most close to us, consists of small groups in which people interact face to face, directly affects the quality of life through relationship with individuals. Therefore, its nature and quality are important to us. So you see family, school, peers, religion, workplace, neighborhood. These are all in our microsystem, and these are really important to us, and they affect our lives on a daily basis. Each family member has a different microsystem. Moms and dads and children have different microsystems. For example, young children include whoever cares for them during the day, such as a babysitter or a daycare center, along with parents. And so they have different microsystems. The mesosystem, or the mesosystem here, is made up of a relationship between two or more groups of which the individual is a member of. So for children, for example, the mesosystem might consist of the relationship between parents, the daycare center. For parents, the mesosystem might include the relationship between family and the workplace, because these are two larger systems in which we spend time in and are interacting with. The exosystem is a setting in which individuals don't take an active part. This is the part that has some effect on their meso or microsystem. So for example, parents will include, it would be their relationship to the school board. They don't have a direct relationship with them, but they are affected by them. They make decisions in the schools which affect their children. Children will have family benefits and their parents' work, which will affect them. How often their family is at home with them and who's looking after them. The macro system includes or consists of society's ideology and culture, where shared beliefs are the basis for policy decisions. So our government policies come out of this area here. Policies based on the assumption concerning the pattern of relationships between sexes, while such policies tend to be adjusted according to changing economic and political situations. So the decisions about family can be affected by whether there's a conservative government, a liberal government, an NDP government, and this is all within the macro system. And then the chronos system, as chronos suggests, this is a dimension of time as it relates to social environment. The external influences refer to historical periods and cohorts. So this has to do with the different age group of society and how it will affect over time the changing effects on family. So when you, in your age group, if you're in the 18, 19, 20 age group, you might start having, in some cases, your family's anytime now to in the next 10 to 15 years, and your role in that over time will change what families look like and how they behave. And so this ecological theory is more around the relationship of different levels of systems that exist within society. The last theory we're going to look at, and again, we're just doing a brief overview. Find these all in your textbook so you can refer back to them, and I hope you do, is developmental theory. And developmentalists look at the entire life cycle of a family and its formation to the right through to the end. Now, developmental theory looks at things from the perspective of families having children, and so it breaks down into various stages based on the children and the adult development. And the theorists, developmental theorists, say that families going to change in predictable ways. That when families get together, they date, they get married, they work, they have babies, and these babies, as they get older, require the family to do and behave in different ways. They say this is predictable. In fact, each stage and task is related to a social time clock. And so the social time clock is the social expectation, culture to culture, of when certain life events occur: dating, working, marriage, and babies. And you may not have this experience, some of you in this age group, in your age group, but some of you may, where if you didn't have a child or weren't married by 30, that somehow women in particular would get a lot of questions about, well, when are you going to get married? When are you going to have a child? And you might hear this more from grandparents, because in their generation it would be something that to be 30 and not be married and not have a child would not fit within the appropriate social time clock. You should be married and have children way before 30. Now, in our time clock, that might be different. So this is one of the flaws of this developmental theory, is that the social time clock may not be consistent from generation to generation. Developmental theories have been described as providing an idealized model of how real families don't really fit into this. Relies on the concept of nuclear family, and current research is now responding to these changing forms. So this theory is trying to update itself a little bit. Now, the last two things I want to comment on are relative to research and how these theories are researched. When we look at researching families, there's two ways that we can research. It's quantitative research is one example, and this is where we seek, this is where the data is represented in numbers. We gather tons of information. Now, if you want to look at it this way, if you go fishing with a great big net with very little holes in the net, when you drag that through the water, you'll pick up everything. And so when we do quantitative research, we pick up a lot of information, and then we analyze that information and use statistical computations to understand all that information that we've picked up. And so this will be done through experimentation. Researchers gather this data. They often perform statistical analysis, engaging in correlational. Is there a relationship between these events that are occurring? Cross-sectional research, cohort-affected studies, and longitudinal research. What you're seeing in the bottom right-hand corner is a table which looks at structures of family, and it's through quantitative research that we find out the number of total families, the number of families in couples, the number of families that are married, that are common law, lone parent, single parented by females, and single parented by males. And it's through this type of research that we can get this sort of information. The other form of information is through qualitative research. And it's through this qualitative research that we seek to understand the social conditions from the people being studied. So we will meet them face to face, we will interview them, use telephone surveys, internet questionnaires, surveys by mail, all as a way of gathering information from individuals to get more in-depth information. And so this is kind of like taking that same fishing net and having very big holes picked in it, and now you're really only picking up that information that you want. And so it enables you to sort of be more interpretive, which is both a strength in itself and a weakness. Now, there are many definitions of family, as you can see, in terms of what we've talked about just briefly here today. And so there's many theories about how family function And what roles do families play in society? The result of the work of theorists are used in the development of social policies that governments set out for us, how laws get into play, and how eligibility for different social programs are in play. Not all theories explain all elements of society or family. Each has their weakness and shortcomings and is in part due to the complexity of our families. So I hope this has been helpful and useful for you. Please take advantage of your textbook. Don't forget to do some highlighting and make notes, and use sticky notes to sort of organize your textbook in preparation for the first test when it arrives. All right. Thank you very much and good luck, and we'll see you next week. Bye now.